welcome to the Spawdcast. My name's Carrie Hyde, and I am your host and your pet's life coach. Today on the show, we're going to be kind of wrapping up a little bit about what we've talked over the past few seasons. We're going to be talking about just your pet's diet in general. So we've had lots of talk on here about a raw diet, a species appropriate diet, vegetarian diets. We've talked about all sorts of stuff. And so I wanted to bring on a very special veterinarian that many of you may not have necessarily heard of. I haven't had her on the show before, but hopefully you have. She has her own podcast. So it's called Vet in the City. And I just want to welcome to the show, Dr. Debra Voulgaris. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Carrie?
I'm good. I'm so excited
I am too.
to talk to you. We've talked outside of this podcast for our listeners to know, and I got so excited just to learn about you, to meet you, to know that you're semi-local to me was really great, because a lot of the veterinarians that I bring on the show are, so far away, and then they're in the Midwest or they're in, the East Coast. And so it's nice to have someone close by, close to home, that we have similar thoughts and ideas about how pets should. I shouldn't say should, right? That's the problem, right? And that's what we want to talk about. It's not your pet should do this way, or do it the way your neighbor does it, or do it the way Carrie says, or do it the way, it really isn't about should, but it's just, we want to talk about all the things that are available and kind of wrap it up in a little package for everybody. So Dr. Voulgaris, can you tell us a little bit about, what veterinarian school, people like to know that, and how long you've been a vet?
Oh, wow. I've been a vet. I graduated in 2005. I went to Ross University. I'm a Rossie. I did my clinical year at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. I did, which I loved. I loved it. I did 2 internships. One was in equine medicine, and another one was in anesthesia at the University of Georgia. And then I went into private practice in Brooklyn, New York, which is where I'm from.
Wow.
I'm from New York City.
Wow.
And I did a private practice for a number of years. And during that time, I was also getting certified in acupuncture. I was very holistic. And then I decided to go back to school. and I went in to do a 3-year anesthesia residency at the University of Tennessee. And then I came out to California.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you came out to California, was it for work, or did you have family out here?
I had no family out here. I knew no one. I knew no one in California.
Wow.
I was at University of Tennessee, and they had, I was into pain management. Part of the anesthesia residency, of course, was pain management. And they had an academic program there for rehab. And I started getting into rehab, and I learned about it, and I decided I wanted to do that. And there was a job in Los Angeles, and I came out as soon as my residency was over in 2011, and I've been here ever since.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's, I'm so glad you're out here. Like I said,
Thank you.
We don't have truly holistic minded veterinarians, too many in Southern California. They've been really, really hard to find, and I don't really quite understand that. I think that holistic veterinary medicine, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in its infancy. What people really understand is what it means to be holistic. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think being holistic is a mindset. It's not just a modality that you do. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that do acupuncture, for example, which is definitely a holistic modality, but the person doing it isn't automatically holistic, if that makes sense. And I think for me, I think that it's something that a lot of people are born into. Like, some people are they're holistic minded. That's kind of how they come into the world. And some people kind of get there, with time. But as I've learned, it's been, 15 years of doing this, and I've gotten more and more along, I've become more holistic over the years, and it's sort of just one thing has led to the next thing, and then seeing, what's happening in our pets, seeing how there's been such an increase. There really has been. There's a prevalence of chronic disease in pets, and it's going up, despite the fact that we have so many advanced technologies. We have, joint replacements, we have dialysis, we have these amazing things that, thank goodness we have these things. But at the same time, we have a lot of really sick animals. And so, you kind of have to start looking outside the box if you're so inclined, but you also have to be super careful because as veterinarians, a lot of us are afraid to go out on a limb. You're afraid to do anything that's outside of the box. And, so some of us do that. And some of us, there have been a number of pioneers that have led the way for people like me, and help me become, holistic. And hopefully I'm helping animals in that way.
Yeah. I love that you say that holistic medicine or holistic veterinary medicine isn't just a modality. You
Yeah.
have to think of it in the whole, because if you use it only as one modality and say, oh, I don't know, maybe there's a liver problem, and the holistic veterinarian says, well, I'm going to use some milk thistle, without truly understanding. I've said this before on the show. It's harming the holistic veterinarian, the truly holistic veterinarian, because then when the milk thistle doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
then they get to go back and go, well, see, I told you that holistic stuff's a whole bunch of hoopla.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And so it's because they use it as this one little piece that they read about and they thought, but they don't understand about
Right.
the whole holistic, which people have a hard time understanding what that is. Right. When we're talking about energy and stress and what stress does on the body and all the stuff we've talked on the show. But one of those modalities, those holistic modalities that I want us to talk about today, and it's super important for us to talk about, is nutrition, right? That's one aspect of what we can. And how important do you think nutrition is?
Oh boy. I mean, everything has to be considered, of course. It's not just one thing that creates our health. But I would say nutrition is, one of the most important things. I mean, it is the foundation of health. There's a whole bunch of other things that we have to, but your body, in a healthy body, and what I've come to realize, not only in my own body and in my own animal's body and everybody around us and every being around us, if you're healthy and you give the body the right nutrients, okay, and all the other things, clean water, clean air, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm making a list. In the last 15 years, I'm making my list. This is what it takes to be healthy. If you're, lucky enough to be born into the world without congenital issues and without genetic abnormalities, say, you should be able to heal depending on the level of insult. Now, if it's a horrible insult, no matter how healthy you are, you get poisoned by some horrific, toxin, you may not be able to make it through. But if it's the things that we're dealing with on a regular basis that are considered, part of life, you should be able to heal with the right nutrition. And so it is the foundation of health. You need other things, but I would say, I don't even know how to put a number on that, because it's really a foundation. Without good nutrition, you're going to start to have problems at some point.
Yeah. No, so. I think you answered that perfectly, because of course I agree. It's really important. I think that if you don't have nutrition, like, you could do some of the other stuff that we need, but without nutrition, exactly why we call it the foundation, because without it, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't even heal from anything if you're eating a poor diet. So, but that's where it becomes, I think, all veterinarians, whether you're holistic, conventional, traditional, however you want to call it, or you're, completely, I don't know, the other way, they can't agree on what nutrition is. And that in there lies this huge problem. So let's take you back all the way to Ross, which, by the way, I looked heavily into going to Ross. Yes, I did. Place. I did. Yeah. I just, vet school was just not in the cards for me, but that is where I would have went. Don't they have monkeys on that island?
They do. They have vervet monkeys. Yeah, they have vervet monkeys, and they are, it's an amazing place to go to school. Yeah. And for more than one, not just the education of being a veterinarian, but I have to say, I would have loved to be able, I thought at the time, to just go to Cornell. That would have been easier to do. That was in my state, it would have been easier to do. But what I found is that it helped me learn about who I was as a person. It was an amazing, and the people that were there had something about them. They were a little bit more, it felt like they were adventurous. They wanted to go, they wanted to travel. They had something. So it was really an amazing experience in education.
Yeah. I bet.
like.
I would have loved it. I
Yeah.
knew they had monkeys there, and I was like, that's not a good reason to pick a vet school. But we'll get back on track here. Sorry, guys. I love that you went to Ross. But do you think that, so for those of you who don't know, Ross Veterinary Academy is actually an island. And so it's where exactly?
It's in St. Kitts.
In St. Kitts.
In the
Okay, thank you.
Caribbean.
I couldn't remember the name of it. It's in the Caribbean. Do you think that they are more holistic in their teachings there than possibly Cornell would have been, or no?
At the time, I mean, I don't know what they're doing now.
Yeah.
But at the time, I think it was pretty much very, very similar to the rest of the education that was being given throughout the United States.
Yeah, which makes sense, because when you finish that school, you have to do an internship here in the United States. So that does make sense. I was just curious if maybe that helped, guide you a little bit. So going back to Ross, did they require a nutrition class for you?
I'm trying to remember. Yes, there were. It was, this is, as I've said before, I'm a really open person. I'm a New Yorker, I'm a really open person. So I'm just going to say, there is some, when it comes to an education, I think that this is true not only of most veterinarians. I think this is true of a lot of doctors that are in medicine for humans. I have friends that are MDs, and yes, we get some education. We do. Did I feel personally that it was enough of an education? I mean, no, not for me. I didn't feel that having a single course or having a seminar that was sponsored by a big company that sells pet food, I didn't feel that was something that, yes, I understood that they wanted me to give a bag of food if there was renal disease or crystals in the urine, or if they were overweight, give this. That to me wasn't telling me what I needed to know from a biochemistry point of view. Really understanding the basics of nutrition is years and years and years of study. And I don't, for my purposes anyway, I didn't feel that it was enough to be able to really guide appropriately every pet. Having said that, I do think that there are some vets that really do know about nutrition. And there are some people that have, studied it in school. Maybe they got out of it more than I did, but I just didn't feel for my purposes anyway, that it was nearly enough for what we need to be doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that a lot from veterinarians, both conventional and holistic veterinarians have told me that they didn't really feel like they got enough out of that. But one veterinarian had mentioned to me that he felt like it made it real simple for the vet. We have all this we have to focus on, so just feed this bag of food. And then it made it real simple. And unless you were a person before vet school or became interested in nutrition to seek out that information somewhere else, like you said, nutrition takes years.
Yes,
I've been studying nutrition in animals and it's really hard for me because there's not a lot of available to me.
Yeah.
I have to really seek it out and talk to people and listen to my own clients and stuff to learn it. So I can only imagine, veterinarians.
Yeah.
Where else are you going to find the information? So that's important. The reason I bring it up is because a lot of times people just say, well, my vet says, my vet says, my vet says, my vet says. And I caution people, I'm not saying that your vet's a bad person, but I caution you as listeners, as we move into the subject matter, which I'm leading us there, I promise. I caution our listeners, when you are speaking to your veterinarians and they're suggesting a pet food, to dive deeper into why they're recommending that, and see if you can get the research. So we're going to talk a little bit about nutrition. And like I said in the beginning, we have talked about all meat diets. We've also talked about vegetarian diets. And now we're going to talk a little bit. And I just want to let you know that Dr. Voulgaris is a vegan. And so I had a girl, for some of our listeners, they may know, and this is just information for you, Dr. Voulgaris. She is a vegan. She runs a company called San Francisco Raw and SF Raw. And she is also a vegan and spends her day in a store filled with whole. Yes. And she herself is vegan. And so I brought, and she used to be a vet tech. And so I brought her on. And one of the things that we're talking about, Casey Maxwell, Casey has always said is what I put in my mouth is for my body and what my
Mhm.
body needs. I can't put those beliefs onto an animal.
Right.
And so she doesn't believe that pets should be all vegan, but she herself is vegan. How do
Okay.
you how do you fall in that scale? Do you think that pets should be vegan?
Okay, so before I answer that question,
I know it's hard. I know.
I'm going to say that there's a lot of things to consider. And um, dogs can be vegan and they can thrive potentially on a vegan diet. Is that your dog?
It is. I knew this was
Hi.
going to happen. My
They got
husband
upset
and
with
Blair.
me saying that.
It's one of
um,
my dogs.
they can be. We're talking about dogs right now, and we've
He
talked
says
a little bit.
vegan.
Hi, honey. Hi.
He's going to give me a hug. Don't
The
worry. You're fine.
I mean,
No, go for it.
animals have a requirement, for certain nutrients. And if those nutrients are bioavailable, important, and if they are complete and balanced, then they can basically live on that, right? It doesn't have to be meat. It doesn't have to be, a specific meat source. Um, Having said that, I think that, that you have to be really careful. And I think that, I've seen people in the vegan community who have the best of intentions, and they want to do an organic, they want to have give the lentils and kale and all of these wonderful things, but it may not be enough, the nutrients may not be there. And it's not that easy. I've worked with veterinary nutritionists in the past, and I've tried to develop a vegan diet. And I have a whole bunch of them. I have a whole bunch of vegan diets. But when I looked at them, I was a little concerned about some of the things. I didn't want to give, you know, a high carbohydrate diet. And kind of, some of the things that are out there are very processed. I don't want to do that. I don't want, one of my tenets of nutrition is I really think that a whole food diet, whole foods, non-processed foods or minimally processed foods are really a great way to go. And a lot of the stuff that was out there, are highly processed. They're ultra processed foods. So, is that ideal? I don't think that that's ideal. Um, but having said that, can a dog, and we're not talking about cats right now, we're talking about dogs. Are they wolves? They're not wolves. We talked a little bit about this. They're not strict carnivores. They can do just fine on certain plant materials. They do okay. Now, there's no carbohydrate requirement for a dog. But having said that, they are able to utilize carbohydrates, which means that they are able to save those precious amino acids for, so that they can do what they need to do, because amino acids are very specific in what they are needed for in the body. And carbohydrates, they get there, there's genes that do code for carbohydrate metabolism in dogs. So it's not that, I think that some dogs might thrive on a raw, meat-based diet. It's an anti-inflammatory diet. I think that is, that has advantages for some, I could give you advantages for every single, diet that's out there. Is
Right.
it one that is going to be the best for every dog? I can't say that that's true.
Right.
For when I'm looking at a cancer diet, for example, if we look at some of the things that have been done, for dogs with cancer, putting them on a keto diet is something that has been discussed by a lot of researchers out there. And we know from human studies and other studies, some animal studies as well, that sugar and carbohydrates, those things can feed cancer. We know that cancer thrives where there's sugar. And so would I want to put a dog on a high carbohydrate diet? Not necessarily. I think they can have some, but I would really want to be careful with the level of carbohydrates that I'm giving. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I just think that I would love for every dog to be on a vegan diet, but I would really, there have been some studies across the board, not just on vegan diets, but also non-vegan diets. And you have to be really careful. A lot of those diets across the board have been found to be deficient in certain things. So that's true of vegan diets, but that's also true of non-vegan diets. These are very highly processed foods. I just don't know that that is what I consider to be ideal if we're talking about the health of an individual. I want them to be on something that's a little bit different than that. And
Yeah.
based on the research, there's a lot of research that's out there that looks at the digestibility of foods, that looks at, how much is too much protein, how much is too much carb. I mean, it's really complicated. And so I don't know that there's just one diet that's the perfect diet for every case.
Yeah. That is, I think, probably the biggest problem is that people feed their dogs. I have 2 dogs and I have now 3 cats. That's another story, but 3 kittens. And my 2 dogs, I change their diets differently because one of my dogs, I noticed if he eats too much protein, he actually gets a little inflammation in his bladder.
Wow.
And so I figured that out. And so so long as I keep him, he's on a high protein diet compared to what most dogs eat if they're eating kibble. He eats a raw, unprocessed, of course. Anybody who knows me knows he's eating a lot of meat, but he doesn't eat it like he used to. Now I do fasting for him, and I do, some days he will eat just vegetation. He'll eat spinaches and kales and stuff like that. The one that's barking is the one I'm talking about. So though my husband's going to walk in any minute, I apologize.
It's okay.
I usually time these when he's not coming in. Just a side note, this dog has been around my husband for 10 years and he still barks at him when he comes home. But that is the big fundamental issue, is what you're talking about, is that we want a one size fits all approach. And so these vegetarian diets that come out, of course, they argue, like what you said, is that yes, dogs can break down carbohydrate. But that doesn't mean I can break down carbohydrate, but I shouldn't eat brownies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right.
Is what it comes down to, right? Yes, I can break it down and I have the enzymes to do it. And we now know that dogs, right, have it, because that used to be one of the arguments,
right,
is that dogs can't break down carbohydrate, but it was disproved. It was, they were able to say that amylase is produced by which is the enzyme that breaks it down. But that just because we can doesn't mean we necessarily should. And I love what you said about the amount of carbohydrates that we're talking about and how much carbohydrate is in some of these vegan diets. I have looked at some, I'm sure you have. I have looked at some that are almost totally rice, and like it'll say like brown rice and white rice and potato, and then the rest is all supplements.
Right.
And I mean, that's a scary concept to think that, in my mind, it's just supplements alone that we're feeding when we do that, which I want to talk about. How do you feel about that part of it? Like if you're making your own vegetarian or vegan diet at home, you would in fact have to add in taurine and stuff, right?
For a cat, you would have to. For dogs, if you're giving certain things, because taurine is not an essential amino acid, but you have to be really careful with this, right? With all the things that are happening, I mean, there are tests for taurine. I don't think it's a bad idea to be testing your dog for taurine, especially with, all of this dilated cardiomyopathy stuff. And we're not sure what happened with the whole grain-free thing. I won't get into that now. I know that's another thing. And there's a lot of, we don't really know what happened is really what it comes down to, right? So I think the problem is, taurine is definitely a concern. There's a lot of other amino acids that are hard to find in a plant-based diet. And one of the things, doesn't mean you can't do it. And I'm not opposed to a certain level of supplementation. I think that we all go through life. We live in a toxic world. I have to take D3. Everybody I know is taking D3, vegan or not vegan, although everything else is spot on, including B12, Wow. But it's like, so many of us are taking a supplement here and a supplement there. I don't think that that's that big a deal. If you're giving an animal, that's like the majority of what they're eating, I think that that's a different story. But I think that, if you look at the food across the board, even, the more traditional, especially the more traditional kibbles, look at what's in there. they are, as you have, I know, it's most of it, there's so much supplementation going on, even in non-vegan food. So I'm not too concerned about some supplementation. But I am concerned about giving an animal, if we're going for a whole foods diet, and most of it's supplementation, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the vegan diets that I've had, I would say most of it was whole food, but we did have certain supplements that did need to be added.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I talk about with supplements, depending on whether you're having a commercial diet do it for you or
Yeah.
people, is that risk of overdosing. We just watched a huge amount of pets lose their life to the vitamin D overdose that was in some commercial pet food. And that's a commercial pet food who should have checks and balances and a lot of people on their staff to watch out for that. My concern is a person at home doing the diet with supplementations, and that, don't you think, is probably pretty dangerous?
I'm always worried about that. The doing anything, there's always human error. It's nobody's fault. It happens.
Sure.
It's very confusing understanding, milligrams. And, I find that, there is a little bit of confusion for people between the volume of food and the actual concentration of something. It's like, well, just put in like, a cup of something. It's like, well, how much was in the cup? Right.
Right.
So I think that it might not be ideal. And I would be concerned about, overdosing or underdosing or, anything like that. And also, I think that when it comes to supplements in general, it worries me that some animals, and some people for that matter, but my job is animals, that if you're on the same supplements all the time, you're kind of at risk for getting too much of something. The body responds. If you're getting one thing, the body has to shift. If you're deficient in something, that's fine. You give it until you kind of are at that, that sweet spot. You don't want to keep giving it for year after year after year. And that's a lot of animals are on the same supplements for months and years. And that's concerning too, because I think that can kind of screw up your equilibrium a little bit.
Yeah.
How
often we're going to dive real deep here. How often do you think pets should be tested, having their blood tests run?
It depends on if they're on a whole food diet or just in general. I think that
either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that past a certain age, I think that they need to be tested a little bit more frequently. So once, depending on the breed, but around 7 or 8 years old, that should be, at least, every 8 months or so. If they're young, if they're 2 years old, 3 years old, once a year is fine. If they're on a whole food diet and the person is, cooking it themselves, I think that it is important to do that a little bit more frequently. There are a lot of tests out there that are not typically found on a basic chemistry or, like if you're looking for B12, you're not going to typically find that or there are some nutrient profiles that you can actually do in animals. Amino acid profiles are one of them. I mean, UC Davis has a really nice profile where you can look at all of the amino acids in your dog or your cat, or, so those are the kinds of things that I do think are a very good idea if you are cooking for your dog or your cat and you want to make sure that there's no problems. You want to make sure, first of all, that they look healthy, that they are energetic, that they're not showing any signs of anything that you'd be concerned about. They're going to the bathroom normally, they're not vomiting, they're bright. But I would be checking the blood every 6 months or so just to make sure that we're okay. And I would do an amino acid profile and just kind of see and talk to your vet about that, because, people send blood up there all the time to look at amino acids and make sure that everything's okay.
Yeah. I recommend that to all of my clients when I'm doing nutrition consults, is if you're going to make your food at home and we're going to be doing this kind of thing, we need to keep check out what's going on. Mostly I worry that people aren't rotating their diets enough. I'm real confident that if you're, I rotate my diet every day. I'm sure all humans do. I don't know a human on the planet that eats the exact same thing every single day.
Right.
And so if we can get our pets to rotate, but I think it's important. So I wanted to hear you, what your suggestions were. I love that. Of course, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
So let's talk. So we kind of talked about when we're talking about a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet, some of the risks, right, are going to be overdosing on supplements and being careful, the carbohydrate content that are in most commercial diets, and making sure that we get the right amino acids.
Absolutely.
Real quick, before we get into the meat diets, which is going to be our next thing, we had talked about the difference between cats and dogs. Let's just because we do have a lot of cat listeners and I'm a huge cat lover. So let's just talk real quick about why is there such a difference between what a cat can eat versus what a dog can eat.
Cats are obligate carnivores and dogs are more toward omnivores. Now I say that because there's a continuum for everything. I mean, dogs and pigs are not the same. I mean, a pig is a true omnivore. Dogs are a little bit more toward that carnivorous bent, but they are able to eat plant and animal and get, nutrients from both. So they're classified as an omnivore. Cats do not utilize carbohydrates in the same way. So cats require certain things, a higher protein diet. They require taurine from their diet. Dogs can create taurine, cats can't. So that's a big difference. Cats are really interesting. They're not small dogs. It's like they're not. They really require certain things. Cats don't drink water the way dogs do. Cats have, evolved not to drink water. Why? Because they get their water content from fresh prey out, and that's how they evolved. And so when cats are put on, I mean, I have it makes me so upset because when we look at what's happening to cats, we have diabetes mellitus going through the roof. They have like metabolic syndrome. They're dying from things like kidney disease, renal disease, and all of these things, obesity. When you see that, I almost always know that cat is on a certain diet. Yeah. And, they go into renal failure. And there is some research that supports this, but also my personal, experience, every time I see an animal that is going into a certain kind of failure, I really talk to the people about this because this is where the holistic stuff comes in. I'm not going to give them a bag of something. I'm going to try and do whatever I can to try to reverse what's happening. They will literally, cats will not drink until they're going into renal failure. And because their mind was not evolved in that way, their behavior has not evolved in that way. And so giving them kibble, in my opinion, is criminal. And I don't care who hears me say that. There's already people that are not thrilled with what I have to say. I'm going to be honest because my job and my life's work is to try and help these animals. And if anybody hears what I have to say and actually listens to me, they may be saving that one cat. So, and I'll be happy with one cat being saved.
Well, I'm going to jump on your train with you, or I've already been on this train. And listen, I know I'll say it too. It breaks my heart to see cats eat kibble. Yeah. And I try not to sound like I'm judgmental. And I know how hard, one of my biggest pet peeves with cats and kibble is that once you start them on it, it is really hard to get them off of it. Yeah. They become so addicted to it so that by the time you realize that damage is happening, now I can't get your cat to stop eating it. And and people give up and they get frustrated and that's all she'll eat. And it's because there's just so much sugar content. I think they just, it's like heroin to them. They become addicted and they need to have it and you can't. So my 3 kitties that I just adopted have never been on anything but raw. They went straight from raw goat's milk to raw meat and that's all they eat. And they are amazingly growing healthy and they will never, ever have kibble placed in their bowl. Good. But I recognize how hard it is, but I wanted to hear, I didn't want people to think even for a second that either one of us was suggesting a cat eat a vegan diet. I think that you'd be, and let alone kibble, right? I would rather, how about, I know what I would rather, but if someone came to you and said, I have this $150 bag of kibble that I bought from my veterinarian, and it's amazing, and it's got all of this great stuff. But someone suggested that I feed this can of Old Roy. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the less
Okay.
expensive. I won't call it cheap, but we'll call it the least expensive can of food on the market. But one is canned and one is kibble. Which would you recommend
For a cat?
for a cat?
Okay. Well, there is, we talked a little bit about the Maillard reaction, and when we were speaking at Animal Wellness, and there's a lot of bad things that happen to foods that are going into a can as well.
Sure.
And it turns out that actually in the canned foods, the advanced glycated end products, they were actually higher in the canned food. Now, having
Really?
said that, yeah, which was shocking to me, by the way.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Having said that, a cat needs to have moisture in their diet. And so, if you're going to put me between a rock and a hard place, I'm going to have to choose the lesser of two evils, because that's what they are.
Yeah.
And, I would at least try to save them. If I had to feed them that, at least a moisture rich food, I guess that would be what I would choose. I think it is absolutely it is unfair. It is unethical to feed an obligate carnivore who relies on and it's not their fault. It's not that they're choosing this. This is what their body does. This is what their body is, their behavior has evolved to be. It's not their choice. Right. They're not going to drink water. They're going to, eat this horrible food that's going to put them into, this metabolic, this insulin resistant state. And it's going to send them ultimately at some point, most likely, into renal failure. It is just, I don't understand how anybody, and then I've seen people say, well, they're on this dry food for kidney disease. I've seen that. I mean, it's just, I don't know what to say, and people are not going to be happy with this. It's not that nobody's fault. The pet parents are being told by experts to do this. They are being bombarded with information. So, I mean, and even, and unfortunately, when you're really indoctrinated into certain things, there's a lot of people that are in veterinary medicine that are groundbreakers. They are making the world a better place for animals. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that refuse to see anything that's a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. And to me, that's not helping their health, and that's what I'm here to do. So I have to be honest about that. Neither one of those things are good options. But if I had to choose, I would give something that has moisture in it. Yeah. No cat should ever be on dry. Yeah.
That's why I asked you, because I own the cat hotel. Most people know I own a cat hotel, and I see a lot of cats, and more and more I'm seeing diabetes and kibble coming in the door. And it puts me in a really hard situation, because now I'm forced to also, I shouldn't say forced, but I am also in that position now where, and I know even if the owner said I could feed him whatever I wanted, it wouldn't happen that weekend. I would have to struggle to try to get the kitty to eat. You got to get the kitty to eat. Yeah. But I've had people say, well, I just can't afford it. And I've said, I would rather your pet feed the cheapest canned food out there versus this very expensive kibble. So I just wanted to clarify. So I hope that clarifies for everyone when we're talking about, because we're going to talk a little bit about meat-based diets and those. Have you been exposed or have heard? I have heard many people say that dogs should not eat any vegetation at all. They should completely eat only meat, bone, and blood, like organ meat. How do you feel about that diet?
I think that there's a lot of research that shows that, plant-based fiber, first of all, yes, I think it's, I understand if you wanted to go in that direction, but the vegetables, depending on the vegetables, it's really not contributing all that. It's not contributing sugar. I mean, if you're looking at green vegetables, say, there's a lot of studies that show that it's really beneficial. It helps to decrease cancer rates. There's studies that show this. They've done studies that have just added a little bit of certain types of vegetables to kibble diet and found that, Scottish Terriers is a very famous study a few years ago, and they found that they had a lower incidence of transitional cell carcinoma, which is a bladder cancer. So
Wow.
I think that I think it is valuable for animals to be eating vegetables if they're willing to eat them. It's not always
Yeah.
easy to get them to eat them.
Yeah.
So I actually, and plus the fiber, insoluble fiber, and the effects that it has on the microbiome. I mean, I think that there's a lot of benefits to feeding at least a portion of the diet, some really good vegetables, low in sugar. I'm not saying go crazy with the starchy vegetables or the carrots and things like that, but there's
Right.
some vegetables that are really have been shown to be valuable.
Yeah. I agree. I've gone through, anyone who's really interested in learning is going to go through their path, and
Yeah.
obviously have. I've gone full circle.
Hmm.
So being a vet tech, I believed 100% in prescription
Right.
diets, and this is what we had to feed.
Yeah.
And then I went from prescription diets to the best kibble on the market. This kibble is better than that kibble. That
Right.
was, in my early days, this kibble is better than that kibble. And I had all my reasons of why this kibble is better than that kibble, to all kibble's bad, which I still believe that all kibble on some level is not the greatest thing at all out there. They do have variations between them. I'll
Yes,
agree
that's
that,
true.
obviously where they're sourcing and that kind of thing makes a difference. But to the all meat diet, but that was very quick. That was very short lived. I
Hmm.
really, for a while there, thought, oh, we have carnivores and they have to eat just all meat. And then I started looking into the vegetarian diets, and we've done a podcast on vegetarian diets,
Hmm.
and talking about some of the things that I know is very dear to your heart as well as mine when we're talking about animals and the
Hmm.
sustainability.
Hmm.
And so that's where I want to direct this into what I want to call is the happy medium place.
Okay.
A little medium, like where, because I would be so remiss in not mentioning that if we were to get all these animals on just meat, a lot more meat-based diets, right? How many more animals are going to be dying, and
Hmm.
can we
Yeah.
even sustain it?
No.
Because people like you and I are fighting to get our animals to stop eating these biscuits and
Hmm.
these, sugary carbohydrate
Hmm.
filled biscuits.
Right.
And in doing so, if we win, if we succeed, then sadly, a lot more animals lose
Yeah.
their
It's
lives.
a it's a it's an ethical dilemma. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then our earth and stuff. And
Hmm.
so tell me what you think about what else can we do? I'm going to ask you, like, what else can we do if we're not going to do all meat and we're not going to do full vegetarian diets or
Hmm.
vegan diets? What are our other options?
Well, I think that there's a lot of kind of cool things happening. So I'm kind of hoping, like you've heard of like meat being engineered in labs. That's kind of what I'm hoping for. That
Well,
would work. That would work.
yeah. Yeah.
I think that it's a really difficult thing. I mean, I know of vegan friends who are also veterinarians that have, like, the food that was going to get like tossed out of the grocery store, they were taking that so that they weren't contributing to buying anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I thought was pretty interesting, and they were trying to
Yeah.
put together programs for that. And I do think that there is first of all, I think that having more, like what you were saying, maybe having some meals that are, more geared toward that vegan end. It doesn't have to be every meal. If you are going to feed a meat-based diet, maybe you can kind of do that some of the time, and maybe other times you can go ahead and, lots of antioxidants from vegetables and have some other sources. Dogs do fine on with lentils and with vegetables and things like that. I don't think that every meal has to be complete and balanced. I think that when we're looking at complete and balanced, we want that over time. I mean, none of us
Yeah.
ever get everything we need in one meal. I mean, we're getting it
Never.
over time, over many meals. I think that that's true of animals too. There's a lot of controversy in so many ways. It's so difficult to just, it's difficult because, there's reasons why some people will say don't feed the meat because we're worried about the health problems from the meat. And there's a lot of concern there among
Yeah.
among
Yeah.
people, right? The bioaccumulation of toxins and things like that in meat, animal products. there's some research now that's looking at how much is too much protein. I had mentioned that before. We're not sure. There is a point where we might start to there's metabolites that are being that are going up that are associated with kidney disease in dogs that are on a high protein diet, at least according to the study that I recently looked at. So I don't know that it's, for every dog. And some dogs, on the other hand, the meat-based diets, they are more keto. They are less inflammatory, if you will. So it could be advantageous for some dogs. But I think if we're going to try to do middle of the road, it's kind of hard because ethically you're on a tightrope, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to do it, I would say, well, then do some meals that are meat-based and then do some meals that are vegan. You can get some really nice vegetables in. It's really good. Also, the fiber and all of those things. It's really important to get rid of toxins. It's really important to, the microbiome changes depending on what you're feeding your dog. So if and there have been studies that looked at protein, like high protein diets, the microbiome begins to change. If you start bringing in fiber and things like that, it starts to change in another way. And we think that it's really helpful for their health overall to have that. Yeah. So I would say, a little bit of both. If that's what you're going to, try to do both, then I would say, go ahead and do, some meals that are just vegan and go ahead and do some meals that are meat-based. I think that's fine. And then see how your dog is doing. Yeah. Of course, how they're responding. What's their coat like? How's their stool? All of that. What's their energy like? Every individual is different.
I love balance over time. I can't stress it enough, but I do that with my dogs, one more than the other one, because one of my dogs is a golden retriever. But I do these vegetarian diets that they get, and it has no meat in it at all. And I get their blood tested once a year, and they are perfectly healthy. They're older dogs. But some of the other things that I have suggested, I'm curious about what you think, is I've had clients do a lot more of the goat milk, which is a lot of nutrition, and the goat doesn't actually have to die from eating that. How do you feel about doing a meal of goat's milk? I know there was somebody years ago who is very respected in the area, which probably going to leave his name out of this right now.
Okay.
There's some stuff going on there, but he fasted a dog for 30 days on goat's milk. Just when I say fast, I mean, it was a 30-day goat's milk fast. Now I'm not suggesting that. Believe me, I'm not saying we should be suggesting this, but my point is his dog was perfectly healthy through it. And so if you did one day of just some goat's milks and those kind of things, how do you feel about that?
I think that I'm not sure. I think probiotics are very important in goat's milk. Typically it has a nice amount of probiotics. I think that like kefir and things like that, I think that can be, it could be good for your health. I think that's okay, but I think that you have to be very careful with your dog. There are some dogs that if you were to try to do that, they might end up getting diarrhea. They might end up having some problems. I think you have to know your dog. You have to talk to your veterinarian about that, make sure that they're nice and healthy. I would never want to, if you had a frail animal, you'd have to go really, really slow.
Diabetic.
Diabetic, of course, or just, an animal that's weak, I wouldn't want to do anything, it would really depend on the dog. But if the dog was a healthy dog and you knew your dog and, I don't see a problem with doing something like that for a day. But I would say before you do it, I would do a little bit at a time just to make sure there's not going to be a problem.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I do. My dogs they fast. They do goat's milk some days in their fast if they're doing that kind of a fast. And, mushrooms, I love adding mushrooms in. Mushrooms have so when I look at, the transitions that I've gone through from kibble, like I told you, and all of this stuff. And now I'm really sitting in this place of how do we make this sustainable, and how do we do both? How do we have the perfect diet is what I
Oh
want. We all,
boy. Yeah, okay. There's no such thing as perfect diet. I mean, that's the
I
problem, right?
know,
There's
I
no such
know.
thing as a perfect diet. I mean, as a vegan, I mean, it's a hard thing because I do know, and I'm not going to mention any names. I do know that there's a couple of big companies that are working on a vegan diet that is home cooked, that is done right.
Yeah,
And these are big companies that are doing it because I think that, you know, nutritionists know that it can be done. So
yeah,
now it's a matter of how do we do it? How do we do it so that we have, you know, it's not a high carbohydrate diet. It's a good amount of protein. It's the right amount of fat. There's no sugar in it. You know, it's fresh food. You know, if we have that, I want to go in that direction.
yeah,
Okay. Now, having said that, it might not, you know, you have to know your animal. You have to watch them. You have to make sure, you know, that you're doing this under the guidance of a good vet. I mean, that would be ideal, you know, and that is, I think, on the horizon. And I'm really happy to say that,
yeah.
you know, but because I think that people really do have to be careful about this. And I know some cats that are vegans too, by the way.
Yeah,
And
really?
it's a little concerning. It's a little
Yeah,
concerning. You have to know what you're doing. And a lot of the stuff that's out there is kibble, a kibble vegan diet for a cat. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It doesn't
no,
make a lot of sense to me. But
no, it really doesn't make any
mhm.
sense at all.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
getting away. It's focusing on, which is always the problem with our animals. We're focusing on one thing. And if you're
Right,
doing a kibble, then you're not focusing on nutrition, you're focusing on not killing animals
right,
to eat.
right,
But you're
right,
not focused on nutrition if you're doing a kibble. So you're
right.
picking one thing off your shelf, and
Hmm.
that's just not going to work for
Yeah,
our animals.
yeah.
It's but I'm happy to hear you say that we can do this, and
I think we can
just
do
being
it.
careful and working with your veterinarian and understanding, because sometimes people get, they listen to something like this and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go out and do it. And
Hmm.
it's scary as someone
Yes.
like both you and I to come out and talk about this.
Yeah, it's a
And then
little bit controversial, as you know, and
it is.
people get upset about it.
Yeah.
We're talking about, you know, if we were able to do this, it's creating something delicious, okay? Something bioavailable, something that allows your animal to thrive, right?
Right. Right.
And also nobody gets hurt,
Yeah.
you know, because it is hard for me. I mean, I've worked with pigs and
So
I've
hard.
worked with chickens, and they want to live just as much as your dog does, just as much as
Yeah.
you do. So it's a little bit difficult for, you know, but from an objective point of view, can I recognize that there are health issues here that we have to address? Absolutely, we have to address them. Can it be done? I think that it can be. I really do. But I
Yeah.
think that it's still in the works. It's
Yeah.
still in the works. And in the meantime, you know, you have to do kind of what you're doing, right? Like you're lessening the load, you're trying to make it better, you're trying to, you know, you're kind of walking this tightrope. It's not an easy line to walk. It really isn't, but you're doing what you can with your responsibility to take care and maintain the health of your pets.
Yeah.
So I think that you're doing a good thing. You're lessening the body count, and that's what it is. You're making, you know, if everybody did that or tried
Right.
to do that and started to put in meals that were, you know, maybe we do have a vegan meal every third meal, say, that's bringing things down 25% potentially.
It's huge when you
That's
think about
huge.
the
Yeah.
course of, if you think about just on my street alone, all the animals on
Hmm.
my street.
Yes.
If we all just did that, the
Hmm.
difference, we can make such a huge difference. And
Hmm.
while we're waiting for the
Hmm.
diets that you're talking about, which I
Yeah.
will be on board with that so fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Years ago, I had a client, she's way ahead of her time, I guess. And she begged me to put together a vegan diet. And I told her,
Hmm.
I just didn't know how I could do
Hmm.
it and make it work for her pet. And
Right.
so she did end up putting her pet on a commercial vegan diet, and
Okay.
it didn't go well. And
Okay.
so it just didn't go well. This was years ago. And she had to go back onto
Okay.
another
It's
diet
fair.
because,
It's
yeah,
fair.
the dog started deteriorating pretty quickly, pretty
Mhm.
rapidly. And
Mhm.
things were starting to happen. As a dachshund, and his back started having some issues and muscle. It was mostly related to his muscles and things. And so he was only on it for a little over a year, and it just, so to me, we watched it happen. But he was mostly eating rice because that was what was available.
Yeah,
that was what was available. But I have so much respect for her for recognizing it and saying, okay, because she's a vegan, and she was like, I messed up. I wish I didn't do this to my poor animal. And so now she has him back on a meat-based diet, and he's doing fabulous. But we have come, even from then, I think we have come a little bit further in just the fact that we have companies that are saying, can we do this? Can we do it the right way?
Yeah, some big companies. Yep.
Yeah. So it was pretty good. I know there was a company they're out of Canada, I believe, and they were making a diet with crickets. And I'm not going to say that crickets aren't, animals.
But it's more sustainable. Definitely more sustainable.
It definitely was a more sustainable, but I got pretty excited about that. And then I found out it was a kibble, and I thought, oh, darn it.
I know.
Yeah. So I just stopped. I just stopped.
There's a lot of new things. I mean, the things that are AFCO approved, and the things that are like the FDA allows to be, a legitimate ingredient in dog food. There's a lot of things that you're really not allowed to use, or really, like, it's kind of like, under the table if you are using it, right? Because we haven't used, I mean, I remember when I was trying to do it, I was like, let's get hemp hearts in, because hemp is high in protein. It's high in, omega-3 fatty acids. It's really a great source for us. So I was like, well, what about for dogs? And I was having the nutritionist I was talking to at the time and working with at the time was like, we can't use it because it's not recognized by the FDA. So I think that what's happening now is that there's more and more things that we're starting to be able to use because we're just kind of pushing a little bit more forward. And because there are things that people are using algae, people are using mushrooms, as you were saying. I mean, there's so many things out there in nature that we just haven't used that could be really meaty and nutritious and not harming an animal. So, I think that it's going to happen.
I remember once thinking it would never happen that people would feed their pets whole fresh foods. I remember thinking I was spinning my wheels all by myself and nobody cared, and they thought I was a crazy lady who didn't want dogs to eat kibble. And I can tell you without a doubt, because I own a boarding facility, I had to buy a bigger refrigerator and freezer because instead of them coming in with their kibble, they're coming in with whole fresh foods. Now, that being said, they're coming in with these subscription diets that are filled with rices and potatoes. So it's still a struggle for me to get people to understand what nutrition is, but I will take that over the kibble. So I'm very happy to see a lot. And even now I have people who are bringing kibble with chicken that goes on top, and I'm super happy to see that. At least we're getting, I always say that to people because especially if you have a large dog, it's so expensive. And so anything is better than nothing.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So anything is better than nothing. So where do you see yourself possibly doing like a food company? I know you said you
I would love to do that with somebody. I don't, it's hard to do on your own. And especially when you're trying to be a veterinarian, as when you're trying to do work and you work,
I know,
and it's expensive. I mean, I really feel like I really did start because I could see the need for, if you're going to do it, if other people are going to do it. So for my vegan people out there, it's like, if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. And I figured, well, let me do it, because I will be sampling it. I will be sending it for analysis. I will be doing those things that, deem it AFCO approved, if you will. And at the very least, at least I know that I have the main stuff in there. So I did really want to do it, but it's a lot of work and you would have to really put a lot of time into it. And I just couldn't do it. So if there's anybody out there that wants to do it, contact me.
It is really, really hard. I looked into making my own diet for a while too. And it's hard to walk. I feel like if you're going to do that, then you have to walk away from hands-on with the animals.
Yeah.
That was my problem, is that I am so hands-on and I love working with the animals, and that's a whole nother business. So, but we'll have to talk about that a little bit later. But but I am excited to hear you say that there's some changes. Can you, what if you're for a dog, vegan wise, what would be your top 3 things to feed your animal?
From a vegan point of view,
From a vegan point, so we're talking about vegetables. Like, what 3 vegetables do you think people should incorporate into their diet?
Wow. So every vegetable, nothing is simple, Carrie. Nothing is simple. I do like a little bit of broccoli, but you have to be careful. It has some calcium in it. And if you're prone to bladder stones and you're just feeding broccoli and things that have high calcium oxalates, you do want to be careful. But I do like a little bit of broccoli. String beans are great. Asparagus, some dogs like asparagus. That's great. What the study with the Scottish Terriers were looking at different peppers. They were looking at like red peppers, I think, and yellow peppers. I believe that was one of the things. So it really depends on what your dog will eat. And I tell people too that if they're not a dog that will eat a lot of, they pick around the vegetables. Like if you try to put a whole thing, chop it up finely. I mean, you want to chop it up so that you can mix it in with the food so that maybe they won't even know it's there. And start with a very small amount, like a tablespoon or something for the average, 30, 40 pound dog, and just see how they do with that before you start increasing it. But, I think, zucchini, squash. Yeah. But organic whenever possible, because there are some things that really accumulate a lot of toxins in them as well.
Yeah, we had talked on a previous podcast about the toxins in the meat and the toxins in the vegetables. And Dr. Richard Picarin, who I love, and he had mentioned about the differences between those two, and some of it was like 80% is found in the meat, and there's only about 20% of it that's found in the vegetation. So, which is why we're having this conversation, is because we recognize that there's some limitations to an all meat diet, and some of those toxicities can happen and stuff. So I take my pets veggies for anybody who's having trouble getting your dog to eat vegetables, but I would take what you're saying right there, maybe some broccoli, some zucchini, some asparagus that you had mentioned, and put it in a blender with some goat's milk.
Oh, that's a great idea.
And then I grind it up because they love the goat's milk, so I don't even think they really recognize. So I puree it for them, and then they eat it like that.
And you know what? Sometimes I sprinkle on top some nutritional yeast too.
Oh yeah,
which is not the same thing as yeast used to rise bread, because that's a toxin. We don't want your dog eating like dough, like yeasty dough or anything. But nutritional yeast is a different thing, and a lot of, I give that to my cat. I give that to my dog. I sprinkle it on top of food, and it's like a treat because it tastes kind of cheesy. And it has lots of B vitamins in it. It's like it's B complex, B12, everything's in there, and all the Bs.
Oh, wow.
So that's another really kind of good way, maybe something to try.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because people hear the word yeast, and because yeast it's
dangerous.
Dogs are just facing an epidemic of yeast in their body. Their yeasty ears and their yeasty body. And so when people feed them yeast, they instantly think, my dog has yeast problems.
It's very specific, and it's actually a nutritional supplement. I love it. It tastes really, really good, and my dog loves it. And it's really high in nutritional value, and it tastes good. So, sprinkle it on top. But it's specifically really nutritional yeast, not the other kind, not the kind that you put in dough to make bread rise, because that is potentially that is very dangerous. We don't want to do that.
You can get nutritional yeast at like Whole Foods or Mother's Market, those kind of things. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually wanted to do a study, but that nutritional yeast is something I'm kind of interested. Maybe I wonder, how like good bacteria, if you push a bunch of good bacteria and it kind of pushes some of the bad bacteria out, it kind of takes over that space. Do you think nutritional yeast has the ability to help push yeast out of the body?
I don't know. I don't think so, but it's very good for the immune system.
Yeah. Oh,
So I don't
well,
know if
that
it's,
might help.
I don't know if it's going to do it in the way what you just said, but I think
Right.
that it strengthens the body's own defenses.
Yeah,
So it
that
could
makes sense.
potentially help.
Work in a roundabout way. I
Yeah.
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a study on that because I was like, I wonder if nutritional yeast could have an effect on the yucky yeast that's overgrown in all these dogs'
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Dr. Voulgaris, we are coming up. Well, we're past our hour. I could talk to you
Oh,
for days. I could
there's so
talk
much
to
to
you for
talk about,
days. I
Carrie.
could talk to you for days. We could just do this forever.
Yeah.
Tell me how people get a hold of you. How can they get a hold of you?
So there's a few ways. So I am in Los Angeles, and I'm kind of doing, mobile visits and my own thing over here. And you can, find Debra Voulgaris. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook. DM me if you want. If you're interested in seeing me in Orange County in Costa Mesa Animal Wellness Center of OC. That's a great place to go. Could call there. That's in Costa Mesa, and I'm there a few days a week. So, and there's, things coming up. So like, if you're not following me on Instagram or whatever, follow me, because there's a lot coming up on the horizon.
I'm
A lot of
super
good
excited.
stuff. Yeah.
Do you do any phone consults for any of our listeners that aren't in California?
I would be happy to.
Oh, awesome.
That's great. Yeah,
We can maybe
absolutely.
look at their records and get
Absolutely.
your opinion and stuff.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Guys, I can't stress enough how much you're going to want to reach out to Dr. Voulgaris. She's just such a, it's so nice to talk to veterinarians who, how do I say this? Some people, just not just veterinarians, but people get very one-sided and blinded. And I just think it pushes so many people away. It's just like the people like that are going to start hearing me talk about these vegetarian diets are going to be very angry with me.
Yeah.
Because I have been such a supporter, and I am still a supporter.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I am supporter of your dogs and your cats' health.
That's it.
Period.
Yep.
I'm not supporting anything other than that.
Right.
And so if you come to me, and if Dr. Voulgaris, if you were to come to me and say, Carrie, I saw this dog eat a tin can, and now he eats tin cans, and now he's the healthiest dog I've ever seen, and it solved everything, I would be like, we got to look into tin cans. I'm not, and please don't feed your animals tin cans.
No, don't.
I'm not suggesting that at all.
Right.
I'm just saying that that's what I love is that you're willing to say, I'm here for your pet's health. I'm not going to be mad at you if you said you did this and it worked for your pet. Then we're going to look at that and go,
Right.
oh, good, it did work for your pet. And that's so important to have in a veterinarian. And you're really are, I don't want to be cheesy, but you really are a diamond. You really are a diamond.
Thank you,
and
Carrie.
we just don't have very many like you. So I'm blessed to have met you.
I'm blessed to have met you.
Super happy that you're in Orange County sometimes. And so that's going to be great for a lot of
And I
clients.
love that you do ozone baths, by the way. I know that's an aside, but I'm like, it's so wonderful. So great.
If I could just get people to understand, like, use the benefit of it more. It's just, they want instant results. And unfortunately, just like nutrition, I can't say you've been eating junk food all your life, then I gave you some organ meat and now you're healthy. It's not gonna and ozone doesn't work that way either. It takes time, but it does work. It is great. Thanks for mentioning that. So, well, we will have all of your information in the show notes, so people can get anybody that wants to get a hold of Dr. Voulgaris, and then you do a podcast also, right?
I do. Yep.
So, and it's called Vet in the City.
Vet in the City Pet Health Chat. And it's like, with working, it's like once a month I've been doing it, but we're going to continue.
Please listen to Dr. Voulgaris's podcast. Honestly, like this is just such valuable information that you're bringing. True animal lovers will come out and speak. And I love that about you. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Any last words?
No, just, please feel free to, if you have any questions, just let me know, DM me if you have any questions. Everybody that's listening is doing the best they can, and it's a very, very complex maze that they're in. And so we're here to empower. I mean, we've talked about this, want to empower people and support them in any way we can. So that's what it's about.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
To our listeners, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.